Welcome to the September 2023 edition of the Inside Nutley podcast. I'm your host, Tom Greco, and today we are going to talk with Fox 5 lead sports anchor reporter, host of Fox 5 Sports Extra, CBS Sports sideline reporter and host, and of course, Nutley High School class of 1992 graduate, Tina Cervasio. Welcome, Tina.
Hi, Thomas. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for doing this. We really appreciate it. First of all, you have so many credits, I couldn't fit them all into the introduction. So let's start out with 7 Emmy Awards. Tell me about those.
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to all of the producers and all of the editors and all the technical people at Madison Square Garden Network because they're so talented and so flawless. It makes it so much easier for us on the air. So all of those Emmys, and a couple of them are behind me here, they were all part of the New York Knicks broadcasts. So it's one of the highest rated games despite their records each year at times. Even during losing seasons, they're the most watched games because the Knicks, during basketball season, during the NBA season, are the team, the sport to watch in New York City. It's a basketball town, no matter what anyone says. So it's just a phenomenal, talented broadcast crew, and you bring it together as a team. And each year we would win multiple Emmys. And I was the sideline reporter from 2008 to 2015. And we would get Emmys for different shows, different reports. When Kobe Bryant came in and scored 61 points, we had a Friday night Knicks themed show. So every Friday night it had a musical open, kind of like Monday Night Football. And it was just different aspects and different, one of Carmelo Anthony's games. So credit to all of them, which is how I was able to win all of those Emmys as the Knicks sideline reporter.
Well, 7 though, you're kind of like the Tom Brady of Nutley. Is there any difference between the first one and the last one, or is there one more special than the other?
I mean, just having Kobe Bryant's name on a trophy that also has your name is kind of special. Same thing with Carmelo Anthony. I think that just what makes it special in general, because we got to cover that incredible game that Kobe played. And then just, the fact that he passed away, it's just gut wrenching.
It's such an amazing career at such a young age. But let's go back. You grew up on Hampton Place, correct?
That's correct.
Tell me a little bit about that.
I had a great childhood. My parents were actually born and raised in Belleville. And then when they got married, they lived in Belleville for a little bit in an apartment. And then they built their first house, moved in, and I was born a couple of months after that. And grew up with my sister, Corrine. We used to walk to school to go to Washington School. I remember that vividly. My mom would trust us to walk, and we'd pick up milk on the way home for my mom and sneak in some candy if we had extra money and bring it home. So it was really just a different age, right? It was a different era. And I just loved that I grew up in Nutley on a kind of a tree-lined street and a great backyard. And we would have picnics and family over and all that stuff. Would walk to junior high and high school through Yannicka Park. Sometimes I would take Center Street, depending on who we were picking up or where we were going, walking. So those are some of my best memories from growing up in Nutley, walking to school, whether it was Washington, Franklin, or Nutley High. Because it was just part of the whole experience, meeting friends on the way home. I'd be walking home from, say, cheerleading practice, and we'd walk through football practice and see the guys. And so just, those are kind of my memories growing up in Nutley.
Were you always interested in sports?
Yes. So, my dad watched sports, my grandfathers, a lot of my mother's cousins were coaches in Belleville. My Uncle Joe was a well-known coach in Nutley, Joe Zara. Crew, freshman football, wrestling was the big one. Became the athletic director, became the principal, became the superintendent. So I grew up in a family that was full of educators and coaches, and the whole emphasis was not to become, an NFL player or an Olympic champion, but how sports benefits your education and your growth as a person in leadership, discipline. It's another arm of education. So that's kind of the atmosphere that I grew up in. So I just love sports, but I also just loved going to games with my father. He had 2 daughters, but I was kind of like I was almost like a son. Like I wanted to go to my Uncle John's football games on Friday nights in Belleville. We would go to see Uncle John Sineski, who was the head coach of the Belleville football team. They would play on Friday nights. We would go see Uncle Joe's freshman football team Saturday mornings. It was just like a thing I did with my dad. We would go around. We would go see cousin Jimmy coach the basketball team. He was in Belleville, and then as well as over in Lyndhurst. Cousin Mark and Carl. Well, cousin Mark was basketball as well. He ended up at Caldwell College, moved his way through the ranks. cousin Carl was coaching softball. So growing up, that's what I saw. So that's why I got interested in sports, tried them all. And I just still loved going to games, even if I couldn't play in them at the highest level. So I ended up talking about them.
Tell me about your memories of Nutley High.
Oh, it was a good time. Still talk to a lot of my friends from there. My best friend is Lisa Tagliarini. We still talk constantly and see each other. And I mean, I remember vividly the different seasons of the year. If I wasn't cheering at a football game, we would all go hang out, our friends, and support whoever was playing soccer on Friday nights. And we would have great parties, good times at everyone's houses over football season. Where were we going on Saturday night? It was like the big thing. We couldn't wait. Whose house? I would love having, I had some parties at my house. My mother would love it. She would have like a ton of food, and we'd have all the boys and girls over. And we had a really good time down in the basement in our lower level. It's a great experience, Nutley High School. And then I ran track and field in the springtime, and we would walk from Nutley High School up to DeMuro Park. And sometimes there'd be a bus, sometimes we'd get a ride. By the time I was a senior, we would drive up there because I got my license in time for that spring. And just remember going to practices and then friends' homes, grew up in all my different friends' homes. Lisa Guglielmino, Danielle Christie, and I'm going by all of their maiden names. Carrie Baldino. I'm probably leaving a ton of people out. Nancy Cifalino, who's now practically a neighbor, again, here in Cedar Grove. So yeah, it was always going over people's houses, birthday parties. And I just really enjoyed that. And that's when we get together for reunions, especially our class of 92. Everybody goes. It's a blast. It's an absolute blast to see everybody again. Even if we haven't seen each other since the last reunion 5 years ago, it seems like we just all kind of come back together again. We had some really good memories. And we were the class that initiated the junior prom, and I'm pretty sure they still have it. So we're talking decades and decades of a tradition that my class started.
Were you a part of that?
Yes, yeah, I was one of the, I think, gosh, what was I? Was I the vice president? I know Peter Bevere was the president. I might have been the vice president of the class, Jubilee, so I don't remember. Heather Von Roth was like the secretary, I think. Who else was with us? Was it Mike Statskowitz? I forget. There was Ryan Craven and Joe Battaglia. They were also class officers. And we kind of created it. There was the very, the famous prom that we would have at one of these catering venues, and everybody gets dressed up and get in the limo. But what if we just got dropped off at the cafeteria, like a traditional, what you see, when you watch Grease or when you watch the traditional
Yep.
American movies of high school. So we kind of created that, and we had the art class do our theme is New York City, and we had a big backdrop of the skyline. I believe Lisa Tagliarini was involved in painting that. So, and we just had it in the cafeteria catered by somebody, and we danced, we had a DJ, and it was just another really cool event that we all got to look forward to and do together.
At what point did you become interested in broadcasting and journalism?
Pretty early on. I think I mean, from when I went to high school, from when I got into high school, it's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I wanted to be a newscaster. I loved Barbara Walters and Diane Sawyer. I used to love watching their shows and to see who they were interviewing, whether it was a movie star or obviously a political figure where I heard their name and maybe they're from another country or one of our presidents or whatever the case may be. But the ones that really got me were the athletes. And I remember Barbara Walters interviewing like Shaquille O'Neal, and another story that Diane Sawyer did with Olympians was a big thing. I was obsessed with the Olympics because I was a gymnast, and Nadia Comaneci was my first favorite athlete. So I loved Olympic games, Olympic sports year round. Roberto Tomba was my other first favorite athlete. He was a skier from Italy. So just always loved all sports. I wasn't just watching high school football and high school basketball, and loved journalism, was interested in the broadcast side because you can use pictures and video and you could see the person versus writing an article. I liked how you could watch the person answer the questions. So that's what I pursued. I took a public speaking class in high school with Mr. Sasso, Dennis Sasso. I now speak at his son's classes once in a while. He teaches journalism, I'm pretty sure, in Bergen County. And so I talk about sports journalism with them and really enjoyed that public speaking class. No fears. I mean, butterflies, but not afraid. Loved getting up and speaking in front of people. So that was kind of like the first step there, and writing. And that was my strongest subject, writing in English.
So you graduated high school, you go to Maryland, the University of Maryland. What was that like?
Oh, it was great. It was a Southern school. I went there. I picked Maryland over like Syracuse and UConn because it was warmer and it was beautiful when we went down there to visit. There were flowers and we got to walk without shivering like we were in Syracuse. But it was also between two major cities. It was between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. And all I kept hearing about pursuing a career in broadcasting was you have to do these internships. You have to do internships at television stations, radio stations, etc. And I just was like, well, then how would I do that if I'm kind of remote in some of these other college towns? So I just loved the location of Maryland, and it was within my parents' circle and that they made on the map, because originally I wanted to go to like UCLA.
Of course.
And that was great. I met some great friends. I have a text chain that still goes on to this day of a group of 5 of us. Most of them were athletes because, of course, I befriended the soccer players, lacrosse players, field hockey players, and they became my best friends, and I would announce their games. So it was a great situation. And it was also, a major Division I school in the ACC at the time. They're Big Ten now. But it gave me, they were in a space at the time where basketball was just coming off of sanctions. So I had a lot of access because it wasn't like it is now where, the football team's winning bowl games and contending to win a Big Ten championship. Maybe it's a little tough in football, but basketball for sure, they won the national championship after I left. But it gave me great access and great hands-on experience with my fellow students there at Maryland, but to be able to go to press conferences with coaches like Gary Williams at the time, it really was a special moment. And I got to work for the women's soccer team. So my best friends on my dorm floor, my sophomore and freshman year, soccer players, those, hung out with them, went to the parties with them, worked out with them in their off season. I go running, lifting with them, and I became the women's soccer manager.
Okay.
So then I got to work for April Heinrichs and Jill Ellis. April was the head coach at the time. She went on to become the national team head coach for quite a while. And then Jill Ellis was an assistant coach. She had just graduated from like her master's, and she became the assistant coach. And she went on to win 2 World Cups as the coach of the U.S. women's national team in 2015, 2019, got to cover both of those World Cups and their parades, which was super cool to see Jill. Like, it's Tina from Maryland. I was your manager. And she it blew her mind. I was like, look, I became a broadcaster. She's like, I became a head coach. I'm like, yeah, you did. So it just, that whole experience, sometimes stuff comes up later on in life. And it all goes back to the decision that I made when I was 17 to choose Maryland. I'm like, my gosh, that was probably one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life.
What was your first professional broadcasting job?
There's a lot of freelancing to start. The first time I was ever on real TV, though, on air, I was still a senior at college, and I did a story on the difference between lacrosse, outdoor lacrosse and indoor lacrosse, field lacrosse, box lacrosse, and HTS at the time picked it up. It was the regional sports network, home team sports in the DC area. So I was pretty pumped about that. Maryland, obviously hotbed for lacrosse. Women had just won the national championship for the second time while I was there. So it was a big story because a bunch of the guys on the men's lacrosse team were getting into pro lacrosse, and some of them were either going into the box or the indoor. So that was like I'll never forget, that was my first real package on real TV. Started in production for a long time. So my first real paying job in production. So I actually wrote for and was the sports editor for the Nutley Sun. So it was Recchio Publications at the time. So it was Nutley Sun, Belleville Times, Bloomfield Times, and the Glen Ridge Post, maybe something like that. So I was doing all of the sports pages there. So that was my first job out of college. And it was a great experience. I interviewed Tom Cruise's high school wrestling coach at Glen Ridge because he was retiring. So
that's cool.
About his career, and then we got that little thing in about Tom Cruise. I got to do stories on some of my classmates, like Chris Young, who went on to Colgate. He was a great wide receiver there and was playing really well. So I did a story on him. I remember that. I was doing both sideline reporting for CN8 for arena football. And then I worked on a show called Varsity Sports Zone. And I covered Essex County, but sometimes it would overlap with Bergen County. So I would work with that reporter. It was such a good time. His name was Kevin Burkhardt. And Kevin and I worked together on Varsity Sports Zone. Never saw him in person. We would just talk and this was before texting. And we would talk on the phone, and we would make sure we never overlapped each other's stories. And that's how I got to know him. And then eventually we worked together in the same building when he was doing CBS afternoon drive radio, doing the sports updates. And this was one of my biggest, like my bigger first real on-air jobs, full-time, insurance, imagine that, got health insurance finally, where we were all working for, oh gosh, I guess it was Westwood One / Metro Traffic at the time. And I was doing a combination of sports updates for like Bloomberg, would fill in at 1010 Wins, as well as doing news and traffic for morning shows. So it was kind of I would just keep switching. I was in one booth and I would just keep switching the channels. All right, now you're on 102.7. Now you're on 11:30 a.m. Bloomberg. Now you're on 1010 Wins. And Burkhart was right across the way at WCBS Radio doing updates over there. So, but that was like one of my, it was a little bit of TV, then radio full time. And my biggest break, I believe, was in 2004 when I went to CBS 2 New York, and I was the weekend morning sports anchor. And that was in college, all they told me was you have to go to a small market, you have to move to Idaho or, Yakima, Washington, or I would have interviews in like small town Georgia. And they'd be like, you are too New York, New Jersey. We're sorry, we can't hire you. Because I had, my accent and I talk like an Italian American and I talk really fast. And so that wasn't their speed. And that's fine because I wanted to work in New York. Sorry, the rest of the United States of America. That was the goal, to work in New York City. And I was super lucky in my late 20s, got that job at CBS 2 while also doing the radio. So I worked for about 5 years. I worked 7 days a week. Did radio during the week, morning and afternoon. I'd have the split schedule. And then on the weekends, I did that for 4 years. On the weekends, I did CBS 2 in the morning as the sports anchor.
How did you juggle all that? I mean, that sounds like an insane schedule.
Yes, still doing it 40 years later, or however many years, 30 years later, still doing it some weeks. So I work 5 days a week at Fox 5, and I do college football, sometimes a little college basketball for CBS Sports Network. So on the weekends, I'll travel on a Friday, do meetings on Friday with college football coaches, and then do the game on Saturday. And then I'm back at Channel 5 for Fox 5 from Sunday through Thursday. So still doing it.
Did you find it difficult to get into a traditionally male-dominated industry?
It's interesting. When I wanted to get into it, I never looked at it that way. I guess the first time I really thought about getting into sports and then focusing, like learning about players and positions and how a game is played and rules, I was like in 6th grade. My dad took our family to the Rose Bowl. And, my mom was like, cool, vacation in Southern California. We get to go to Disneyland as well. And we get to go to the Rose Parade. And I was like, oh, we get to go to a football game, and a big college football game. And it was just during that game, that week leading up to it, we were meeting families, like parents of players. It was Iowa versus UCLA, actually. And we were meeting players, parents and families, and they were wearing all their garb and the cheers and the events they were having. And I was like, that's so-and-so's parents, and that's so-and-so. Then I would make sure I knew their number and watch them play. And so I got into a little more of the minutia of the game with my dad. And he's like, you should really look into a career maybe in sports, or like sports broadcasting. Because at the time, it was Gail Gardner, who had been on CBS, the NFL Today on CBS. He's like, there's women doing it now. So to me, I was like, okay, there's a woman doing it. And I watched her and she was great. And that's what I wanted to do. And then there was Leslie Visser, and then Linda Cohn, and Hannah Storm. And I loved Linda Cohn because she had a New York accent. So I loved watching her on Sports Center because I was in college at the time. Like, she's got an accent. So I could, throw my Jersey sort of New Yorkish, fast talking accent around. And I just, by seeing those, each and every one of those women appearing on TV, and it was few and far between, but I never saw it as like, oh, there's only 2, because that's all I watched. So I saw Leslie Visser every Monday night, and I loved how like she would laugh and it was so nice to the players, and they would answer her questions. And how did she come up with that question? So I never thought I'd have to be in a male-dominated industry. I just looked at them and I was like, okay, well, what are they doing to get on that sideline or to get into that studio? That's sort of how I looked at it.
Were there any challenges?
Oh God, yeah. Not getting a job, living at my parents' house till I was 28, basically, because, you're making $25 a story sometimes when I was working at those small stations. And then when you finally get those big jobs, it's not what you think it's going to pay. And then I was saving for a house and getting married. So I was like, I'll just live home because I wanted to save money and I wasn't making a lot of money. And that I really, and then the challenges came. So then when I was getting into the big time clubhouses and locker rooms. There was conflict here and there, a couple of players. I mean, I was with the Red Sox for 2 years. I moved up to Boston and was the Red Sox. I mean, everybody calls it something different at NESN, New England Sports Network. It was just I guess they just called me the field reporter. Maybe it was sideline reporter, but there's no sidelines in baseball technically. So I know they call Meredith Morakovitz the clubhouse reporter, but whatever they call it, I was in Boston for 2 years, and initially there were some players that were rough on me, but it was also, I think it was a big generational change too. There were some older managers at the time that they were not used to seeing women in the clubhouses, et cetera, asking strategy questions and about pitch count and different rotations and things like that, lineups and questioning a lineup or questioning, a call that a manager makes from the dugout or, switching to relievers or whatever. So they weren't comfortable with that. So they were a little snide back, but it helped me build kind of that whole thick skin they talk about. And what kept me going were the people or the men that were great.
Who were your broadcasting heroes and mentors?
Well, it's so neat because Leslie Visser was someone I looked at from afar and just admired and wanted to be like, and she was an inspiration and a hero. And years later, I was able to meet her when I started working at CBS Sports, and to be able to meet her and email with her. And she reached out to me first, actually. It was even before I got to CBS, because I was working for one of her former producers at NESN. And I had been there for a year, and he knew that I worshiped her. He gave her my email. She reached out, and it was the coolest moment. And we're been in touch ever since. I keep her texts forever. Like I've texted her like 5 years ago. And because she is still that, and she is still such a great journalist. And what I always loved about her was her, again, like you talk about emotions, her empathy for players and their story, their backstory, but also asked like the hard questions when they were needed about turnovers and why a team was losing or certain situations like that. So being able to, so she's also become a mentor, and, I was like, hey, Leslie, while I have you here, can I ask you, what's the best way to approach this?
I'm old enough to remember the very first Sports Extra with Lee Leonard and Bill Mazer, believe it or not.
Yes.
What's it like to continue that tradition?
So how about this? My producer was their intern.
Really?
In there
Really?
that long. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
18 years old.
Wow.
So it's getting not retire soon, but so I knew of it because I watched it. I was a little more of the Tom McDonald era, obviously. I remember him, and then they started becoming my colleagues, like Drew Castiglione, and Carl Reuter and guys like that were on Fox 5. But I mean, I remember that was we didn't have Sports Center, and that was the only show you could watch in New York on a Sunday night and get the other scores. Like, how did the Steelers do against the Cowboys if the Jets and Giants didn't play those teams? So that's how you could learn. And he would do scoreboards, right? He would just have these, and the graphics were they were cardboard in front of a camera. And that was the big deal. Like he was Sports Center on the Sunday night.
Yep.
And he would have his good interview, and he would get, and that was also the only show in town. So he would get everybody.
Yep.
He would get everybody in studio.
Yep.
And it was a different era again. So, it wasn't like, I'm going to need car service and I'm going to need to stop at dinner. And now I'm like, I can't do it. Sorry, so different budgets. Well, I'm going to go to the other show. So that's the challenge I have today. But for him, the fact that they kept that show around, and the biggest change they made was change it to an X instead of the XTRA. So modernized it a little, also emphasizes the Fox, because it wasn't Fox at the time. So it was at WMYW, but it was whatever it was at the time, I forget, but on Channel 5 still. But so it emphasizes the Fox. And now, I mean, even when I started freelancing and filling in on Sports Extra, starting in 2009, when I came back to New York and was actually working at the Garden for doing the Knicks, but the summers were light. I was only doing soccer in the summers, so I had time to freelance and continue anchoring and reporting. Even then, it was a little more traditional, but now it's like a little more human interest, a little less highlights, because game's not even over, and I could rewatch, Daniel Jones getting sacked by Nick Bosa 18 times without having to wait till the game to end and see what they're going to put on Fox 5. So it's a little different. It's more of the the quick highlight of the game, because I already saw it. Let's do a quick summary. We're not going to show you every play, but what's the story behind it? What unique sound can we get? What analyst can we get on? But I really like doing the stories, and a little back to the Tom McDonald era. Where he would want to go at, like, the big thing is like, oh, get somebody in studio. And I get that. It's really cool to have somebody with a big name in studio. But I've noticed in the last 2-3 years, and that's what Bill Mazer did, but a little bit like Tom McDonald, he'd like to go out and be in their atmosphere.
Mhm.
So I enjoy doing that. I enjoy meeting a player out doing something, and then I get my interview, and then we could air the long format. It always goes back to Bill Mazer.
Yep.
Everybody just talks about what the groundwork that he laid, and you have to evolve with the times. So, but it still gives it that prestige, which is an honor to just even have this job.
Great. All right, we're gonna do some random thoughts. I'll throw out some names or something. You just tell me what comes to mind real quick.
Okay.
It's like I stole it from Michael K. But uh, the Olympics.
I don't want to use anybody else's terms. Humanity.
But what about
Love watching the humanity. There's incredible stories behind these athletes. It's wonderful to see them win and reach their goals, but sometimes there's great stories and lessons learned when they fall short of their medals and their goals.
what's it like covering it though?
Oh, it's neat. It's really neat to see just all the athletes from all the different countries, all different events going on at the same time, to hear the different languages when you're walking from venue to venue. And then this is the pinnacle. And even talking to NBA players when they go to play for USA basketball, it's a whole different animal. It's so different. It's a different emotional feel, because it's it's the world stage. The whole world's watching. And it means it's something different when you're playing for your country. It's less about your stats and the team. It's about the country in the way, because people might not know one rule about basketball, but they're rooting for you because you've got the USA across your chest. So things like that's what, so covering it when you go to a practice, or when somebody does lose out on a medal opportunity or something, there's just like a deeper emotion, and it's more of a feeling like, it's not that I failed, it's I've let someone down, I've let the country down. It's a little different in the win-loss stories in the Olympics, and that's what makes it just shows a wonderful side of humanity.
How about Good Day New York?
Very early. But fun. It's an energetic show. I mean, when we get rolling, and I'm so glad, like, now that the whole pandemic era is over, one of the things I just loved about it, you never know who you're going to run into. The elevator doors would open, there'd be a llama walking by, and just you get a combination of these strong political or controversial figures, and then just some ridiculous fun comedian. So it's a great atmosphere. And a lot of people, and what I love when people tell me that, oh, I was on the treadmill this morning and I saw this story, it's always something unique when somebody's watching morning television.
Right.
So that's always kind of fun. But Good Day New York is a New York, it's a staple. It's been around for a long time. It makes Fox 5, it's the the trademark show on Fox 5. It's what makes our channel stand out. And New York is not New York without Rosanna Scotto. She is New York.
Yep. How about Daniel Jones? Forgetting last night.
Quiet, but focused. He is, and he's as focused as he could be with the offensive line that he's dealing with. So, I know it's hard to evaluate him right now when he's running all over the place and looking at defenses like the San Francisco 49ers. But I sat down with him last week. He's a Duke grad. He's a smart kid, and he answers your questions. He's very dry, very quiet, very focused, but a really nice young man. I mean, looks me dead in the eye, shakes my hand. There's athletes who don't even look at you or don't shake your hand. They're like, oh, hey, and they sit there, mic me up. So he is class act like that. And you know what? He represents the Giants tradition. He really, really does. And that goes back to why he was drafted, very similar to Eli. There's a lot to accomplish on the field to get to Eli, though. But in that nature, tall quarterback, a little much more mobile than Eli though. But the way he handles himself in the locker room and with his teammates and things like that. So that's always refreshing because we saw how far Eli eventually got. So the
What
highest.
about what about Eli?
So I did a great interview with him last year. Again, after he's retired. Funny, dry. He's like smarter and wittier than you, so you have to like be ready. Like, what's he gonna say? Because he might say something hysterical and you might miss it. So that's the thing now with Eli. But he was, I mean, he stood at that locker, win, lose, or draw. He would stand there sometimes for 35 minutes, just standing there, question after question after question, and you get the wave of the TV reporters, and then the beat reporters would come in, and then like national reporters, and then we would come back and get more stuff. And he just was always there. Another, again, class act. And clearly we learned after retirement how hysterical he was behind the scenes, because players would say that. We'd be like, God, no, he's not. Like he's just, but he was always, would make those quip kind of remarks to some questions, so you knew there's something in there. But no, he's a legend. He's a New York legend.
Do you think he's a Jersey guy now?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. I mean, his kids are all in Jersey kids playing hockey and soccer, cheering for all the New York and New Jersey teams. I mean, he became a part owner of Gotham FC. He's got his kids at the games this year and they're cheering. It's adorable. So that's really, really cool. Tweeting about, being a hockey dad. And there was some other game that how he doesn't understand lacrosse. I mean, it's just, I love it. Yeah,
I would have thought.
he's Jersey. He's a full-blown Jersey guy now. Oh, yeah.
That's great. How about Carmelo Anthony?
Oh, well, it still like guts me that he never was able to win a championship, but he is an Olympic legend, all of 3 gold medals. And people don't realize he worked really hard. He took up boxing to help with his balance and his fitness and his kind of off season to keep his weight down and his lean muscle up. He really worked hard. And I think a lot of that got lost sometimes. And because of the results, because he never won a championship or played in a ton of finals when he was the main player. He's a New York legend too.
Speaking of legends, how about Derek Jeter?
I mean, he is unique, the best of the best. I mean, talk about a champion. I mean, that's, beyond, he's a champion many times over. And another one who was like super intense. I mean, again, that does say something. It's not the youngsters we're talking about here that are winning championships and are legends. It's the guys that are really focused. He was very hard to interview. But I found when I was early in my career, like ask him about other players, ask him how, Robinson Cano is hitting behind you now and his batting average is up. I know you've worked on him with his hitting. Oh yeah. What's been the biggest difference? Well, in this count and that, oh, Derek Jeter talks a lot. Like, so that was kind of the thing about him, wouldn't talk about himself. And, when they lost, he was pissed. Like that was the end of it. It was, you win. And when you win, it's already like, how are we going to win tomorrow? Like, why are we talking about this game? It's over. Like, how are we going to win tomorrow? And he admitted that in a lot of his Hall of Fame speeches and careers, how he was kind of always on to the next thing. And he never savored maybe some of the wins and the moments and the championships. It took a little bit later in his career to realize that, I guess, when his ankle went and it was kind of winding down. But what a great personality now. And he's Mr. Interview broadcast guy.
Right.
I did an interview with him right before the All-Star game, like, well, Fox Sports colleague. And so I'm his age. So I grew up seeing him in the New York City clubs a lot. So it was kind of fun to finally reveal that to him. And, that's what I could resonate. Like, we're the same exact age. He's a couple months older than me. So it was fun not using the term old timers with him, because I refused to use it because he's not an old timer, because we're the same age. Yep. So I was like, can we call it the Yankees retired legends game? He's like, yes, let's do that. We're not old timers, right? So, but yeah, champion is what that's what comes to mind with Derek Jeter through and through.
How about Pete Alonso?
He's a great guy. What a great guy. Really is. For a kid from Tampa to put his heart and soul into New York causes, and I mean, he came out of the gate a great player. He with the home runs, rookie of the year. there was pressure on him when he was the Mets top prospect coming through, pressure on him because his defense at first base wasn't so great initially, which is maybe why he wasn't called up a year earlier. But he knew the power that he had, that he worked on since he was like a 7-year-old. And he put it to work, and it showed on the major league level. And then to see him immediately go out and support like 9/11 causes and be there in person and create things like cleats and break rules and have the team wear 9/11 hats and like all kinds of different things for a kid from Tampa. That was a little kid, 6 years old, when we went through this tragedy. So he is a great person. And the Mets really need to re-sign him. They do. They have to.
What's the biggest change that you've seen in athletes in your time covering them?
I think the social media has made them some of them, a little more sensitive, because it's more, but it's beyond the newspaper articles and the reports. It's now social media stuff. And sometimes it comes from fans and it still gets to them. They say they don't read it. They do. Someone tells them about it, a lot of them. So I think that changes them. It almost makes them more guarded. So yeah, so I think that's changed athletes a little bit, but it's also, some of them made them more outgoing, and you could, watch them sing their songs and releasing their record albums. You learn about their endorsements or fun podcasts that some of these athletes do. And I would only have learned about it through social media. So
Right.
then it creates more questions for me to ask when I sit down with the person. So, I mean, I think that's what's very different about covering athletes today. And I do that a lot with the college athletes. Like, I'll go through their social media. Some are active, some are not active at all. Especially at Army, they're not quite as active, but you'll find out what kind of pet do they have? Do they have a dog? Do they have a cat? Do they have fish? And it could kind of creates more content for you, which makes it easier if like the journalist and the reporter puts in the work. It's fun and it's interesting. And again, it makes them human. Like, oh, they're humans too. Like, this kid's also studying for aerospace science and things like that.
Is there a bucket list of interviews you haven't done?
The Aaron Rodgers one's been put off for a bit, but he was never on my list until March of 2023. He was never on my list until then. Who else? I've interviewed Nadia. And I got Michael Jordan on when he was in the Hall of Fame. It was a group, so that was kind of cool. At least I was right up there. Let's see, who have I not sat down with? I mean, there's a couple, like, it's not even a bucket list. It's like, oh, I've got to get them this year because they're new to the area, or they're, like, I haven't sat down with Sauce Gardner yet. Dying to interview him. Trying to go through the basketball teams. I never got Kevin Garnett or Kyrie Irving face to face, but I got Ben Simmons the other day, so we're off to a good start for this next season. I'm trying to think otherwise. I've never, still never interviewed Billie Jean King. It's like, but what else is there to ask her? Trying to think.
What about somebody like, did you ever interview Joe Namath?
Yes. And that's so funny you mentioned him, because I just got a contact. So I'm doing a Jets show in in 2 months. And I was talking to my agent about former players. And I was like, I should try to get Klecko and Namath for that show. And I just got his contact name, but I interviewed him at the United Way dinner a couple of years ago, as well as March of Dimes. So, and I did a whole story on his history of giving back. And he was like one of the first big time athletes who did that. He was like the first, and it was United Way and it was March of Dimes, actually. It was, and how he would do the commercials for that and show up, and the kids, Joe and the kids in that one commercial.
Yeah.
So I did a whole story on how he set the stage, the precedent for all of that. Super nice. He was great. Both my interviews, super great. I got to interview Lawrence Taylor, but it was on Zoom, and it was one of the most, I was like, oh my gosh, my teenage self is like, yeah, he's great.
I have some photos to show you. You care to look at them?
Okay, yeah. How do I get your put on the screen?
I'm going to show you. All right, you ready? You tell me what you think.
My high school. I guess I'm a senior photo.
Yep. What do you remember about that?
So here's what people don't realize. They're like, oh, you used so much hairspray in like the 90s. No, that was my natural hair. If I used hairspray, it was to make it flat. That was before we had good products.
Yep.
So there you go. My senior picture.
What are you thinking there? You thinking of a career in sports journalism?
I think I was a little more focused on news there, but I definitely want to be a broadcaster.
Okay.
Definitely did. I think the sports really came to fruition when I saw that I could take sports classes at Maryland. So,
How about, well, this week we actually touched on this a little bit before.
there, yeah, those are the class. So there we go. And Stephanie, that's what Alfonso. She was the other officer. I guess we changed officers. So anyway, let me explain that picture. Though that's our class officers. And yeah, I'm standing next to Joe. Joe went to the University of Maryland as well. And Amy Radel, oh my gosh. So she was also, I guess we just kept switching around our different officers each year. But I think that was our senior year. Or
And
maybe that
that's,
was junior year. But that's my uncle. That's Uncle Joe. He was
yep,
the head coach of wrestling. And he was, special ed teacher at the time. That was before he became principal.
right.
And Miss K was my Miss Kowalski. She was one of my favorites. She was also my track coach. She
Right.
was my shot put coach. Yeah, there's a lot of memories in that photo. I mean, Joe and I went to college together, and Pete and I mean, our families are friends with the Beviers, and of course, Amy and Stephanie were good friends. We were girlfriends in high school. So it is just, wow, what a small world. That it feels like yesterday, honestly, feels like yesterday. It really does. Like not that long, maybe like 3 years ago. So
Okay.
not that long.
Um,
Cheering. That was our senior year. Michelle Penaranda and Nicole Shuren, we were captains. So those are the three of us across. And that is the good old 90s cheering, baby, with the jazz hands. Love it. We had
what
the old jazz
what
hands.
what was your most memorable game as a cheerleader? Do you have one?
It was it my sophomore or junior year when they lost in the championship game against Randolph? But that was a big game. I mean, I remember like 4 buses of Nutley fans going to Randolph for that game. That was my sophomore year because Joe Pyro and them, they were the seniors at the time.
Mhm.
Yes, Jenny Pyro was one of the captains. Maybe it was my freshman. No, I think it was my sophomore year. I just remember cheering on the track there in that game, but they lost. And we were sad. We were all crying. Like it was the end of the world. So these were my girlfriends I was talking about earlier, and I knew I forgot a friend. It was Amory Curtelli, now Amory Meadler I'm looking at it far right. And then it's Lisa Tagliarini, myself, Carrie Baldino, using all the maiden names, and Danielle Christie. So yeah, still talk to them. I don't get to see them as much. I haven't seen Lisa in a while, but we always talk, and I see your kids on social media. Same thing with Carrie, and talk to Danielle a ton. And yeah, that's how I talked about them earlier. I was like, I'm forgetting somebody. It was Amory.
That was your
Our
core.
best friend picture.
Yeah, that was your core group in high school.
Senior year. Mhm.
Okay. All right, a couple other things. Favorite athlete to cover?
David Ortiz. Sorry, Yankee fans.
Why?
Funny. He was great. He was a champion. He always very similar to Eli, but I didn't know Eli yet. He would just stand there and answer the questions. In bad times and in great times when he's breaking Jim Rice's home run record or whatever the case may be, or going to another World Series. And he was the only athlete who would ever say, "Oh, I have to do something. I have to go talk to Tito or run. I'll be right back." And 99.9 of athletes, you lost him. He's not coming back. David Ortiz would come back. And sometimes he would just jump in front and be like, "What do you need, Tina?" By himself. And I'm by myself. Know what? Okay. I get whatever questions I needed from him. So he was fun. And he works for Fox. So I did an interview with him recently, and he's just fun. He's just a funny guy. And it was fun to watch him hit clutch home runs. That's what was so cool. It was the walk-off home runs, especially at Fenway Park, that were so fun to cover. And to interview him, right as he crosses the home plate, the craziness is going on. And then to be the first person to talk to him and interview him, he was easy to interview in that aspect. He would tell you about the at bat. He'd tell you some silly story about something, and a little bit about the game, and just, so he was fun to cover.
Favorite team to cover?
I mean, the Red Sox won the World Series for me. I have a World Series ring.
Really?
Yes,
Wow.
it says Cervasio, 2007 Nesson, because that's who I was working for. But the 2012-2013 New York Knicks, who won 54 games and did make it to the second round of the playoffs. That was a lot of fun.
Favorite sports cover?
Football.
Favorite Jersey Shore town?
Oh, well, I grew up going to Wildwood Crest, but now Cape May has our heart. We rent a house there every year. It's great, beautiful. The restaurants, the shopping, the old time, the New Orleans Southern influence. I love it.
Favorite Bon Jovi song?
That's a tough one because there's so many. I mean, I guess You Give Love a Bad Name is the one that comes, like, I'm thinking of Nutley right now, but there are better ones like later as an adult. Oh gosh. Well, yeah, the high school era would be You Give Love a Bad Name. I just remember that was our anthem. And Living on a Prayer, though, that kind of stands the test of time. That song. Those are two classics. I'll stick with those.
All right. Last year, you were the Grand Marshal of the Nutley Belleville Columbus Day Parade, and you were elected to the Nutley Hall of Fame in 2011. What do those things mean to you?
They mean a lot because they actually make my parents really proud. Because that's why they mean a lot to me. Because it means a lot to my parents. Because we talked about them growing up in Belleville earlier, and they raised me and my sister in Nutley, and that was the town that we grew up in. Our whole memory of life is Nutley. My parents still live in the same house, so that was an honor, and to just the family time we had from it just means those are memories I'll never forget. Like, like a wedding. We had such a good time last year with all the little events leading up to the Columbus Day Parade, the Italian dinner, and I guess we were at Ralph's one night and going to mass and the beautiful gala a couple weeks ahead of time. And it was fun because my mom's cousin, Jimmy Carino, who was one of the coaches that I used to go watch, he was also honored. I grew up with Michael Zinna. He's one of my best friends. His brother was also honored. So it was like just, the crisscross of all the Nutley families. So it's just such a special, special memory. And I'm just grateful that the people chose me for both of those honors.
What do you miss most about Nutley?
I just miss the simplicity of the old days because I'm Nutley all the time. So I get to see the high school and all that, but Thanksgiving at my Aunt Donna Zara, and obviously my parents, like I said, still at my childhood home. But I miss just the simplicity of the old days, like I said, like walking to school and like after school. I just miss that, going to practice and having your friends and going bike riding in Nutley and just not, didn't have the cell phones and your parents weren't looking for you. It was never like unsafe. Like the big thing is like, don't fall off your bike. So that, that was like the big worry for my mom, like don't fall off the bike and like smash your face, which I did once. But, there was, it was just a different day and age. And I remember that just hanging out on friends, little stoops, in front of our homes. So I miss that and then like just all of those friends, we're sort of spread out now. And we talk on social media and who's got 4 kids, who has 2 kids, who's, all over the place. We're working. I have weird hours. So it's, you don't get to see those friends anymore, but at least we kind of know where they are. But I miss seeing them all the time.
Well, we talked to Phil Cuzzy, the Major League umpire. He made a point of saying that, going all around the country, obviously, like he does, and he tells people what Nutley's like, and people give him funny looks like, really? There's places like that? Do you find that too?
Yeah, with the downtown, so because it's still kind of the same. So you've got Franklin Avenue, which is our little downtown, and what the Nutley Oval, smack in the middle of town. A lot revolves around the high school's events and town events. I mean, the fact we're one of the I think there's 5 towns in America that still have a local Columbus Day Parade and call it that. So that came up a lot last year with people that weren't from this area that I work with elsewhere. Yeah, and it's and I'll never forget, speaking of Nutley and all the different people, it was at Good. So this is good. This is bringing everything together now, Thomas. I was at Good Day. I said, you never know who you're going to see. And it was the day that we were taping our Halloween skit. So it's fun being part of like a team, like on that show, instead of just being the sports anchor and you just show up and do your sports and leave. On Good Day, you're like a cast. So I don't even know what our theme was that year. I think it was voting or something. And we were all music stars. And I was Lady Gaga for Halloween. And we were going to tape our segments. And Martha Stewart is in the hallway. So yeah, with the blonde wig, and I'm Lady Gaga in full costume, glasses and everything, says Gaga. And took my glasses off. And I said, Martha Stewart, I'm Tina Cervasio, my real name. I'm the sportscaster here. I'm from Nutley, New Jersey. Conversation starts. Where did you live? Where did you grow up? What year did you graduate? Who do you know? And we're just going back and forth. And we talked about the Hall of Fame. So again, proud we're from Nutley, and so is Martha Stewart. All that she has done internationally, and her stories. And there she was carving pumpkins on Good Day, and there I was dressed as Lady Gaga. And we have a really good picture of that, of the three of us in our costumes as music stars with the real Martha Stewart.
That's a great story.
From Nutley, New Jersey.
From Nutley, New Jersey. Well, Tina, thank you so much for taking your time and spending an afternoon almost with us on Inside Nutley. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for just thinking of me, Thomas, and even just having me on. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Tina.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.